I am a reporter from the New Territories Media. Today, the prison publicity department approved my interview and I was assigned to the prison to interview a death row inmate. This case has attracted widespread public attention and has been hyped up by major media as the biggest case of the 20th century. Although the newspaper has a background in the authorities, it still took a lot of effort to get this interview opportunity. Originally, such an opportunity should have fallen to the senior predecessors of the newspaper, but because the criminal was extremely vicious and killed a cellmate during his sentence, even if he was accompanied by a prison guard throughout the process, it was still possible to endanger his personal safety. Several people in the newspaper pushed and pulled, and finally this big job fell on my head. I am not afraid of death row inmates. If you want to survive in traditional media, the most important thing is to be willing to take risks, but I still underestimated this serial killer who committed more than 20 murders. At the end of the interview, for some reason, he suddenly rushed towards me in shackles. Fortunately, the prison guard knocked him down in time, and I just sprained my ankle while retreating. The interview was forced to end halfway, so I could only go back to sort out the existing materials and review them with the propaganda department to see if they could be reported as criminal education topics. Who knew that I was unlucky? On the way back, there was a sudden rainstorm. I stopped at a cafe called Wish to rest and planned to return to the newspaper office after the rain stopped. While I was sorting out the audio, a girl stood opposite me. She was about 16 or 17 years old and was still wearing the school uniform of the city's middle school. I looked around. It was raining heavily today, and this road was remote. There were only me and her in the cafe, and there were empty seats everywhere. She seemed to see what I was thinking and took the initiative to say, "I know you are a reporter." She pointed to my work permit that was still hanging on my chest. Could it be a citizen who asked me for help? I looked up and asked, "Is there anything I can help you with?" She didn't answer me, but sat opposite me and asked me a question. "If I promise that you will not be punished, will you commit a crime?" The word crime came out of the mouth of a middle school student, and there was a weird sense of disobedience. However, it is easy for teenagers to have some non-mainstream ideas during their rebellious period, and use them to promote their own uniqueness. I put down the recorder in my hand and laughed. "Little friend, with the current criminal investigation methods, criminals cannot escape legal sanctions, so we have to be legal citizens." She seemed not to hear me and continued, "I want to tell you a story. Are you free? I can buy you milk tea. In my career, this is the cheapest bribe I have ever received." But it was raining heavily at this time and I couldn't leave here. Due to the needs of the news profession and the purpose of killing time, I nodded and agreed. "No need to treat, I am willing to listen to your story." I picked up the coffee in front of me and leaned back leisurely. The rain outside the window meandered down, and the street scene turned into a blurred oil painting. I thought it was just a plain conversation to kill time, but I never expected that I would hear the most shocking case in my life from here. Student Self-Narration 1. My name is Su Lien. I am 19 years old this year, in the 3rd grade of junior high school. Most people at my age would have been preparing for the college entrance examination. I was so slow not because I was held back, but because I actually skipped several grades. I went to junior high school at the age of 19 because I didn't start school until I was 12. When I was young, I moved several times every 3 or 4 years. My father would drive a big truck and take my mother and me from one city to another. He was a performer in a circus. In the 1990s, parade circuses between towns were very popular, with singing and dancing, acrobatics, and animal performances. After performing in a city several times, the circus would move to another city, perform the same set of content, and collect tickets for profit. There were more than a dozen performers in the circus. My mother and I stayed in the rented house all day, so we would not meet them. We would only meet them when the circus moved. I thought they were scary. Although they never talked to me, maybe because they had been with animals for a long time, they looked at people as if they were looking at animals. I couldn't explain it clearly, it was just a feeling. In a blink of an eye, I was 10 years old and had hardly seen the outside world. My mother always quarreled with my father, and she said I should go out to school. When I was 10 years old, my father compromised and made his last move. The last time we moved to a large city in the central part of China and rented a large house. My mother and I lived in the last row, and all the circus performers lived in front. I finally went out to school and started first grade at the age of 10. Wishing Cafe. Didn't you go to first grade at the age of 12? I interrupted Sue's recollection. There were many unreasonable things in the girl's narration. I used to know about circus practitioners. They moved much more frequently than you. They had to change places every 1 or 2 months. Your father's circus could perform in a city for 3 or 4 years. General practitioners leave their families and children in their hometowns, but your father took you with him even though you didn't go to school at the age of 10? These details can't stand up to scrutiny at all. Even if it is a fabricated story, it is a bit clumsy. I lost my patience. Su Lian smiled. My father's circus business is better than anyone else's, and his animals are smarter than anyone else's. I still frowned, keeping a critical attitude. Su Lian's autobiography too. Because I started school later than others, I was very tall in school. In addition, I had hardly been out of the house before, so my accent and behavior were very strange. Not long after I started school, I was excluded by others as an outlier and my life was very difficult. But my brain was not developed at that time, but I was happy to see my mother at home. My mother was as stupid as me. She spoke and acted very slowly, like a rusty machine. Later I learned that if a person is locked up for a long time, his brain will be broken. But one day, when I came home from school, my mother suddenly went crazy. She shouted, "Ghost, there is a ghost, run," and then she screamed. I was so scared that I squatted on the ground. She suddenly grabbed me and talked nonsense for a while, but I could still hear that she said she wanted to take me away. Luckily, my father came back in time, comforted my mother, and took her back to the room. I didn't see her for a few months later. My father said she was sick. When I saw her again, she was sitting in a wheelchair. She looked like she had aged several decades, and she looked dull and dry. Using the word dry to describe a person is not accurate, but this is the word that came to my mind at first glance, as if a person had been drained of life, dry. There was a blanket covering the wheelchair, and I lifted it up and saw that my mother's legs were gone. My father said that my mother had a leg disease and could only be amputated, so I burst into tears. Have you ever tried to deceive a 10-year-old child? I tell you, children are easy to deceive, not just children, but all ignorant people are easy to deceive. In the past, my mother occasionally had the opportunity to go out, or walk around the house, but now she can't walk at all and sits in a wheelchair all day. Fortunately, my father took very good care of her. There was always a TV series she loved in front of her, various urban magazines at hand, and 3 meals a day were fed to her mouth. He always leaned over and whispered in my mother's ear. "I love you, you know, I always love you." She became even more stupid, and I never gave up, lying beside her and talking to her, but I felt that she could no longer understand. About 2 months later, my father went to the house in front. Maybe the circus had a new show. My mother suddenly called me. I looked into her eyes and felt that she seemed to wake up. I was very happy. "I'll tell Dad." She lowered her voice. Lian, come here quickly, come here quickly." I trotted over and lay down where her legs should have been. My mother held me tightly with both hands. "After school tomorrow, don't come back. Go to your teacher, any teacher, and tell them that you want to find the police. Someone will help you." I shed tears. "Why don't you want me to come back, Mom?" She was anxious and looked out the window and the door several times. The hand holding my shoulder became tighter and tighter. She seemed to have something important to say, but she didn't want to say it, which made her grit her teeth. Finally she spoke. Lian, just do this." She reached out to hug me, and I leaned over. The next day, I did what she said, but the teacher did not contact the police, but contacted my father. When he brought me home, he told me that my mother was sick again and had to see a doctor. I was terrified. When I saw my mother again, her tongue was gone, her mouth was red, and she could only say woohoo. I only saw my mother like this once, because when I returned home the next day, my mother was gone again. There was only a bloody fruit knife and a pool of blood on the ground. She came back a month later, sitting in a wheelchair, and this time she had both hands gone. I ran over crying, and she only had a body now, like a Russian doll in the school. There was a head on her body, looking at me motionlessly. Is this person still my mother? No, is this still a person? At that moment, I felt cold from head to toe, and I still remember that fear until now. I didn't dare to go there again, and I never contacted my mother again. But she still had her father to take care of her. Although she has become like this now, her father is still very considerate to her and will say in her ear, "I love you, you know, I love you." When her father held her, he looked very strange, like he was holding a swaddled baby, but the baby had a middle-aged man's head and was staring at him motionlessly. Wishing Cafe. Su Lian was still talking. I didn't know if the air conditioning in the cafe was too low, but I felt a chill. It was 2 or 3 in the afternoon. The sky outside the window was particularly gloomy, as if a heavy rainstorm was brewing, and there was a faint flash of lightning in the clouds. Have you read some online novels? Now we live in a society ruled by law. This is too outrageous. The coffee in my hand was already empty. I pinched the cup. This story was too fake, but I still felt a strange uneasiness. Su Lian took out a stationery bag from the inner layer of her school bag, and took out a 50 yuan bill from the inner layer of the bag. She walked to the front desk alone. I was probably thirsty from talking and wanted to order a drink. At this moment, I saw a family photo of 3 people in her open pencil case. The girl in the middle was Su Huai. The parents on the left and right looked normal, especially the mother, whose hands and feet were fine. She was indeed making it up. Although I had always thought so in my heart, I was relieved to get the actual evidence. Su Lian came back soon, holding 2 cups of pearl milk tea in her hands, one of which was placed in front of me. "It's for you." I took it and took a sip without hesitation. "Thank you, is this my compensation for listening to your story?" She continued to sit opposite me. "You are a writer, isn't it good to listen to some stories?" "This is a common misunderstanding of journalists in the world," I explained. "I write news, and news requires seeking truth from facts and objective reporting. We are not some fiction writers who make up stories." She showed that kind of smiling expression again, and she was joking from beginning to end. She didn't respond to my words, but continued to tell her strange story, which made me feel a little dissatisfied. Su Lian's Autobiography 3. My mother has become a monster. I can only rely on myself for many things. Ever since I told the teacher about it, I always felt that there was a pair of eyes behind me. Although I never found anyone, I knew someone was watching me. I just knew it. Do you still remember when you were 10 years old, a random threat could make the most naughty children tremble with fear every day? Bravery is not a child's instinct. I just felt isolated and helpless. My father was still so gentle, but I felt that he was the same as the other people in the circus. He looked at us as if he was looking at animals. I couldn't trust him. One day I came home and found that I had my period. Although I was only 10 years old, I already knew what it was. If I soiled my pants at school tomorrow, I would definitely be laughed at even more. My mother's room was empty. She was taken by my father to the bungalow in front, where the circus performers lived. I thought of her first. I needed her to help me, no matter what it was, even if it was money to go to the supermarket. Finally, I stepped into the bungalow in front alone. This is my first time here. The bungalows are very large and connected into a small area. I walked into 4 houses and didn't see anyone. In the 5th bungalow, I finally heard the sound of people talking, and it was my father. The dark house had already made me shudder, and his voice was like a beam of light, which instantly put my mind at ease. But he seemed very angry. "Why did the anti-pornography police come here yesterday? How do Songo and others do their work?" Was he scolding people? I stopped. Another voice sounded. With the boss's protection, what are you afraid of? What can the cops find? What did he mean? I didn't understand a word. My father's voice also softened a lot. Go check the goods, and don't let anyone make any noise. No one spoke after this sentence. I heard the sound of lifting the wooden board, and then the sound of dang going downstairs. It's so strange. This is a bungalow, how can you go downstairs? I couldn't help but be curious and looked inside. There was no one in the house. There was a dark hole on the ground. They must have gone down from here. Woo, woo, rooster crow. I heard this sound coming from the hole. It was my mother. So my mother lived in here. I felt something was wrong at this time. My mother used to be afraid of the dark. Even when she lived in the back row, she had to open the windows of the room. How could I not know? I pressed against the wall. Not only did I not dare to go in, but I also did not dare to leave. My mother's voice soon ended, and I heard the conversation between that person and my father again. Last time your daughter went to find someone to call the police. Others didn't know, but I did. So what, are you afraid of the police? Humph, you don't need to provoke me. It's better to be safe than sorry. I fed one yesterday and vacated the cage. When you decide, let your daughter come. They were discussing me. I felt my scalp was numb all the time, continuously, as if ants were gnawing at my scalp. I don't remember how long I had. When the numbness spread to my calves and I couldn't hold on any longer, my father and the others had been gone for a long time. I finally mustered up the courage. I don't know if it was curiosity or courage. I ran over to lift the floor, and in the dark hole, there was a cement step. It was easy to go down. I thought of my mother down there, and I went down without thinking. If I were older, or if I went back and thought about it for a night, or if I was smarter, I would not go down. I still regret it to this day, and I have a feeling that I will regret it for the rest of my life. Why I walked down that step that day. The space under the steps is very large, not like a cellar, and there are 2 rows of dim lights on the top. We rented a private house, and there was no decoration to speak of, but this basement was very luxurious. It took me a long time to describe it. It gave me the feeling of a museum at that time. At the beginning, it was a long corridor with some different things placed on both sides, including a few tumblers, a few animals tied with ropes, and a few boxes. There were not many things, making the corridor look very empty. I didn't see anything special. This might be the storage room of the circus. The tumbler is bigger than it looks from the outside, like a small wooden barrel. I had never played with circus toys before, so I walked over and pushed one. Shake, shake. It fell down and stood up again. It was really interesting, and my nervous heart finally relaxed. But at this moment, I found that 2 lines of water flowed down the face of the tumbler, just like tears. I moved closer and stared at the 2 lines of water. Suddenly, the tumbler's eyes blinked. I screamed in fear and fell to the ground. Woo, woo. The tumbler made a sound and its head began to shake, as if a person was shaking his head desperately at me. I recognized it. It was my mother's voice. But this tumbler was smaller than my mother's body before she left. How did she get in? And it was sealed all around. How could she get out? And her head was so big and covered with oil paint, and it didn't look like my mother at all. Ah! I widened my eyes, and tears flowed uncontrollably. The other 2 tumblers turned their heads and looked at me. Here, there are all people. I stumbled and ran to other places. Those animals were tied with heavy chains and slowly stood up. Those boxes were all small cages, stuffed with people who could no longer be seen as human beings. I ran inside and saw all kinds of deformed and disabled monsters. They all followed my steps and moved their eyes silently. I didn't dare to make any more sounds, but I suspected that this was a dream, or I was crazy, and I didn't dare to believe that these were real. These manufactured things are the underground circus that my father has been showing to the outside world? When I ran to the end, I saw a huge snake there. It lay lazily on the ground, with a bulging belly. The shape of undigested food could be seen outside. It was clearly a human. I remembered the words I heard outside just now. I fed one yesterday and freed up the cage. Wishing cafe. Cough 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 cough. I coughed hard to spit out the pearl stuck in my throat. The pearls here are very sticky, but it's not their fault. Whoever hears such a perverted and evil story can't control their breathing. The rain outside the window is getting more intense, hitting the window with crackling sounds. Su Lian sat opposite me, still with a playful look on his face. The feeling of coldness is getting stronger and stronger. Although I have been engaged in criminal reporting for many years and have heard of many cases of murder and dismemberment, I still can't stand such a weird story. Story, yes, I think this is a completely fabricated story. Although there have been cases of deformed circuses abroad before, and there have been rumors of some underground deformed human exhibitions, as a media practitioner, I understand that this kind of thing is extremely risky and difficult to operate, and the feasibility here is almost zero. First of all, it is very difficult to collect so many human bodies. Secondly, the survival rate of turning people into that state is too low. Putting aside morality, this is also a business with unequal input and return. That's what my mind told me. I felt sick and uncomfortable because this was a teenage girl telling me face to face, making up a story about her mother being made into a deformed person by her father and put into a wooden barrel. Su Lian, do you need me to send you to the psychiatric department for evaluation? She sat in a daze, half smiled. Why do you want to go to the psychiatric department? Because you have paranoia, and maybe a certain antisocial personality. In short, your mental state is not optimistic. Why do I have paranoia? Do you think these are all fake? I laughed in anger. Of course it's fake. If this really happened, why didn't you tell your teachers and classmates? If you were so secretive, why did you tell me, a stranger, these things today? Speaking of teachers and classmates, her expression finally showed a hint of reaction. My classmates bullied me. They stuffed garbage into my drawer, cut up my school uniform, pressed my head into the toilet, and laughed at me after class. I have heard too many examples of common school bullying and have reported on it. No matter what school or age, their bullying methods are the same. Sometimes I think it is the original malice in people's hearts. Su Lian continued. In fact, the most uncomfortable thing is not these specific things, but those things that exist all the time. No one walks with me during recess, no one wants to be in the same group with me in physical education class, and the way they look at me when I walk through the corridor. You won't understand unless you really experience it. Those things exist all the time. As long as I am in school, I have to endure every second, and I can't leave school. The teacher hates me too. Of course, I hate the teacher too. If he hadn't told my dad at the time, I'm afraid my mother and I would have escaped long ago. She said these words with sincerity, and I was moved. I felt sympathy for her and forgot the story she just told me for a while. There must be something wrong with her life. Whether her father is a perverted demon as she said, she needs legal help. I will call the police for you now. Tell the police what you said to me again. Su Lian originally lowered her head, but now she raised it suddenly. That was 9 years ago. Why call the police now? She laughed again. Life got better soon. My father disappeared, the people in the circus disappeared, and the deformed man disappeared. My classmates and teachers were on a spring outing when the bus flipped into the mountains and disappeared. I was very close to her at this moment. When she said these words with a smile, I instinctively took a step back. It was raining too hard outside. The windows here were not well sealed, and some water leaked in. I slept because I was restless, but fortunately, I stood up in time. You are a lunatic. I really don't know why I wasted my time listening to you say this. I started to pack up the things on the table angrily. Su Lian continued, Don't you want to know how I did it? Her voice was like the whisper of a devil. I gritted my teeth and felt that I was fooled by a middle school kid. I felt that I should stay away from this kind of psychopath. On the other hand, I had a mentality that I had listened to her for so long, otherwise I would see how outrageous she could be. What do you want to say? You don't want to say that you killed them all by yourself, and the police didn't catch you. 9 years later, you suddenly felt guilty and confessed to me. I made a wish. What? I suspected that I had heard it wrong. I made 7 wishes, and they died one by one. The story developed in a fantasy direction, which made me feel relieved. Who did you wish for? Su Lian made an inviting gesture to me. This is the last part of the story. When I finish, the rain will stop, and you can leave, right? I sat back in my seat. Su Lian's autobiography 4. After coming out of the basement, I fled back to my room. I spent the night in fear and went to school the next day. If it were me now, there must be a better way, whether it was to go to the police station to report it myself, or to find a few more teachers, or even to shout in the street, or to run away from home and never come back. But when I was 10 years old, I chose to remain silent. After the experience of the teacher telling my father last time, I didn't dare to tell anyone again. Besides, who would believe me? No one in this world would listen to me seriously. If people knew that I had those things at home, my classmates would ignore me even more. Maybe they would give me another nickname. If I told these things to others, everyone would ask me. Everyone's reaction would be huge. I couldn't bear it. That day I was tortured again at school. They wet my pants and told everyone that there was an older child who wet the bed in their class. In short, the 10-year-old me decided that I would die after school today. After school that day, I was the last one to leave school. In fact, I didn't really want to die. In fact, I didn't even understand what death was. It was probably disappearing. But I really had nowhere to go. If my father caught me in the basement, or if my classmates knew about it, it would be more painful than death. I walked on the path home, and my mind was full of the word death. Thinking about it gave me a headache. My home was originally remote, and because I was afraid of seeing people, I usually chose a more remote path after school. There has never been anyone here. Not only is it not close to the main road, but there was also a murder case in a kindergarten before, so no one dared to come. There is a small ditch in front of the kindergarten. I decided to die there today. It suddenly started to rain heavily, and I held up an umbrella. When I got closer, I found a black dog at the entrance of the kindergarten, huddled up in the rain. I held up the umbrella and prepared to walk over, but the dog actually raised its head. It was not a dog, it was a strange man. He was very perceptive, and he sensed it before I walked towards him. In the past, I would have lowered my head and ran, but now I am not afraid of anything. I walked towards him as usual. Maybe I was too small and posed no threat to him. He still sat on the ground. I held up the umbrella over his head, creating a small piece of sunny sky. "Uncle, this is for you." He was really ugly. Although I have seen many ugly people, this is the first time I have seen such an ugly one. And he looked very strange, his eyes were almost all white, and I was shocked when he raised his head. He should be a beggar if he doesn't go home in this weather. Seeing that he didn't take the umbrella, I put the umbrella on his shoulder. I thought, since this is not a dog, but a person, why don't I give him my inheritance as well? So I took out my school bag, took out the uneaten buns, and took out the 7 yuan I saved in my pencil case. "All these are for you." He looked at me with a scary expression. Strictly speaking, he didn't have any expression at the time, but he just looked scary. I put all my things in front of him and turned to walk towards the ditch. It was raining, and the water in the ditch was very high. When I jumped in, I found that the water in this river was smelly. It was so uncomfortable to choke on the water. I closed my eyes and prayed in my heart that I would die quickly. But I was saved. When I opened my eyes again, the ugly man was still in front of me. "Are you a god?" He finally spoke, his voice was like sandpaper. "No." After that, he was about to leave, as if he remembered something, turned around and said to me viciously, "If you die again, I will kill you." I am very good at reading people's faces. I can tell at a glance that he really dares to kill me, and I immediately ran over like grabbing a life-saving straw. "Please kill me, the river water is too smelly, and it's uncomfortable to drink water." Thinking of the taste just now, I immediately burst into tears, from a flat mouth and sore eyes, to howling. He reached out to cover my mouth. Do you want to attract people? I reluctantly kept quiet. At this moment, he suddenly exerted force, lifted me up, and hid behind the iron gate of the kindergarten. It was a long time before I heard an adult passing by outside. He was alert and scary. When it was quiet outside, he asked me again. How old are you? I gestured. 10 years old. Where are your family members? I immediately understood that he wanted to ask these questions clearly to prevent my family from coming to the door after killing me. Don't worry, my family won't look for me, and neither will my teachers and classmates. No one will look for me. Everyone hopes that I will disappear. His eyes were a little dark, as if he had not made up his mind yet. I immediately told him about the things at home and at school, and swore that killing me would be no different from killing a stray dog. He chuckled a few times, and did not answer me, nor did he kill me. He pointed to the school name above his head, Sunshine Kindergarten, and told me a story. Once upon a time, there was a 5-year-old girl who went to school in the kindergarten. She was very kind, but the male teachers in the school would take her to the office every day during lunch break and do something bad to her. She didn't understand what was going on, but she felt pain and cried every time. One day in kindergarten, a fairy tale called 7-Color Flower was told. The story said that a child named Jenny got a magic flower given by a witch. The magic flower had 7 petals, and each petal could fulfill a wish. After telling the story, the teacher assigned a homework assignment, asking each child to write his or her wish on the blackboard at the school gate. When the 5-year-old girl went home at night, she wrote her wish on the blackboard. After a few days, all the male teachers who bullied her disappeared. Guess what wish the little girl wrote? After the ugly man finished telling the fairy tale, he grinned, revealing a mouthful of black teeth, as if showing off his achievements and being complacent. I just kept my eyes open to look at the blackboard at the entrance of the kindergarten. There was really a blackboard there. After being washed by countless rainy nights, it was impossible to find what was written on it. But I already know what the little girl wrote. Is there really magic that can make wishes come true? The ugly man told me. He wrote here last time that he wanted some money, and he really picked up some money a few days later, so he came here to write a wish again tonight. He said it seriously. If an adult is so serious, it must be true. In fact, when people are desperate, they will believe in everything. This superstition accompanies people from childhood to old age. I am a child with nothing. At this moment, I seem to be the one chosen by the fairy tale. I am so happy that my whole body is trembling. The rain gradually stopped. The man looked around vigilantly, and finally stood up. He said he was leaving. Before leaving, he took my umbrella and my $7, leaving me only one sentence. You can make 7 wishes. After he left for a long time, the rain stopped completely and the blackboard was completely dry. I walked over, took out the broken chalk from my school bag, and solemnly wrote down my first wish. I hope my father disappears. Within 3 days, my father really disappeared. Watching the circus people going in and out of my house, anxious as ants on a hot pot, my heart was beating so fast that I almost vomited. I was happy and scared. But they didn't realize that my father's disappearance was related to me. After a while, they didn't dare to call the police, and the matter passed quietly. The magic worked, and making a wish really worked. But I found that my father's disappearance could not solve my troubles. The circus actors looked at me more and more strangely, and I felt that I was about to go to my mother's bucket. I went to that basement again later. I wanted to hug my mother and leave, but she was completely dried up and turned into a dry and small thing. Her bucket was freed. Should I put it in? I wrote the second wish on the blackboard. I hope the circus disappears. The third wish. I hope the basement disappears. That night, a fire broke out in the residential area, and the circus actors and the people in the basement disappeared. As an orphan victim, I was taken into an orphanage in the city. I was already an orphan, and now my life at school became even more difficult. I made my fourth wish, let the classmates who bullied me disappear. My fifth wish, let the teacher who bullied me disappear. They all came true in a bus accident. The days that were originally rotten were revived because of the appearance of magic. I realized that I could be such an excellent person after these people disappeared. Gradually, my studies improved, my personality became more cheerful, and more importantly, I made my best friend in the orphanage. Her name was Gardenia. This was my biggest dream since I was a child, to have a friend of my own. Gardenia was a somewhat withdrawn and sensitive person, who often cried under the quilt at night, but she appeared in my life and illuminated everything for me. We slept together, played together, and read books together. I was supposed to rot in the basement, but now I became the happiest person in the world. Fate is really magical. But when I was 12 years old, a couple from another province came to the orphanage and they wanted to adopt a child. The couple looked very wealthy, and they fell in love with Gardenia at first sight, and of course Gardenia was really cute. The wealthy couple wanted to adopt Gardenia as their daughter and send her to school in another province, but the night before they took Gardenia away, she mysteriously disappeared. Wishing Cafe. This is your sixth wish, to make your friend disappear, because you want to replace her and be adopted by the rich. I stood up from the stool and pointed at her tremblingly. You are a demon, as terrible as Lin Yong. When Sue talked about the ugly man and Sunshine Kindergarten, I gradually doubted whether the story was true, because I really know that ugly man. He is the prisoner I interviewed in the prison department today, who was portrayed by the media as the first demon at the beginning of the 21st century, Lin Yong. His appearance and those white eyes will never be forgotten by anyone who has seen them. He got this title because he admitted to committing the Sunshine Kindergarten mass murder 9 years ago, killing 6 teachers and staff members, and his demonic behavior caused strong public outrage in society. Before this, he had committed crimes many times in various places. Due to the limitations of the times and his extraordinary anti-detection ability, he had been on the run for so many years. Unexpectedly, he still committed these major crimes that he never confessed during the interrogation. I couldn't help but feel chilled. Su Lian sat opposite me, sipping milk tea calmly, as if he didn't hear what I said. I didn't think about it carefully just now because I was angry. Now that I calmed down, I think this story reveals a bit of weirdness. Can one person really kill so many people? Never miss? And not leave any traces? Even if monitoring equipment was not popular at that time, the detection system would not be so useless. Lin Yong killed so many people for a child, for what? Just because this child deserves sympathy? Why did Lin Yong do this for you? Don't you have any other deal between you? I don't know if it was an illusion. Su Lian's expression was gloomy for a moment. You journalists really love to speculate. I don't know, maybe it was just a spur of the moment. When I heard the word spur of the moment, I instantly recalled a conversation I had with Lin Yong in the prison department. Prison department. When I first met Lin Yong, I saw his white eyes. This kind of face with small pupils and more white eyes is called 3 white eyes. It is said that people with this face are often punished. Maybe physiognomy is really a science. I have indeed seen many such eyes in prison. But Lin Yong impressed me the most. His expression was not fierce at all. It can even be said that he had no expression. On his ugly face, there was only a kind of dead calmness, which made people feel uncomfortable. Lin Yong committed a heinous crime and suddenly surrendered after more than 10 years of escape, which attracted such great attention. I comforted myself by saying that this was just an ordinary interview and I just needed to relax. Lin Yong was handcuffed to a chair, accompanied by prison guards on both sides. He confessed to killing more than 20 people and killing a cellmate in prison, which attracted widespread attention from the society. I first stated his case, and he followed the prearranged speech. The interview went smoothly until I asked a question. Why did you kill the victim? He answered. I want to kill them. They deserve to die. As far as I know, Lin Yong once mentioned the crimes committed by the victims in his confession. Among these people, there are teachers who sexually assaulted students, sons who abused their mothers, and local bosses who withheld money from migrant workers. This should be what he meant by deserving to die. Many prisoners will have similar statements, and I don't think it's new. Some people think that prisoners will confess and repent after being executed, but in fact, even those who have committed heinous crimes will never really think it's their fault. They always have countless reasons. I said. No one can make a judgment on behalf of the law. You beautify your crimes and think you are doing justice, right? Lin Yang's voice was flat. The law didn't kill them, but they deserved to die. They deserved to die, and no one dared to kill them, so I killed them for others. Although this sentence is a criminal sophistry, it is very metaphorical, and I immediately asked. Killing them for someone else, do you mean hiring someone to kill someone? Lin Yong laughed, his chest vibrated when he laughed, but he didn't make any sound. I just helped. Help? You've helped others kill people, is that what you mean? Ms. Reporter, this is like a rich man giving alms to beggars on the street, except that the rich gave money and I killed people. But we all helped others, didn't we? There are so many alms in this world, you give what you have to those who don't have, how normal it is. I was shocked by his sophistry and was speechless. These words must not be reported. If it weren't for the gimmick of the biggest case of the century, I think this prisoner should not be reported. He is different from all the prisoners I have ever seen. Neither angry, nor arrogant, nor regretful, he gives people the feeling that, just as he said, everything is up to him. This is a real devil. At the end of the interview, he unlocked the handcuffs, stood up from the chair, and 2 prison guards grabbed his hands. Just when no one expected it, he suddenly broke free from the prison guard and rushed towards me. I was so scared that I took several steps back and sprained my foot in the process. But he didn't get close to me. He just broke free for 2 or 3 steps before the prison guards controlled him again. I didn't care about the pain in my ankle and hurriedly left the prison department. Wishing Cafe. At that time in the prison department, although Lin Yang's words were terrifying, the impact of language was limited after all. Now facing the real beneficiary, I felt a chill. Is there really someone in this world who would help strangers kill people on a whim? And so many people? Lin Yong said that everyone he killed deserved to die. Does your friend, the girl named Gardenia, also deserve to die? You killed your father, mother, classmates, teachers, and your only friend for your own benefit, and even made up such a ridiculous story just to make yourself feel at ease. You are a more terrible devil than Lin Yong, 10,000 times more terrible than him. I couldn't control my fluctuating emotions and shouted at Su Lian. There were thunders outside the window, and rain seeped in, forming a thin layer at my feet. The shop assistants fell asleep behind the counter, and even the lights were not turned on. The coffee shop was as dark as the night. Su Lian took a sip of milk tea and shook her head. I haven't finished yet, don't be impatient. Why do you have to think of me as a bad person? I'm just a friend who tells you stories. She continued to talk about Gardenia. After Gardenia disappeared, I was adopted by the wealthy couple and went to another province with them. Due to many reasons, I had to re-enroll in the local school. I didn't go to elementary school until I was 12 years old. I spent 7 years smoothly in another province. I originally thought that I would never have any intersection with the past. Until half a year ago, the orphanage where Gardenia and I had stayed exposed a news. It is said that the orphanage has been sexually assaulting and abusing orphans for many years. Several orphans have been abused to death in more than 10 years. The bodies of the orphans were buried in the playground and were recently discovered. The relevant personnel have been arrested and brought to justice. The case of burying bodies in the playground. I immediately remembered that I had also reported on this case. At that time I was still an intern at a small media. Su Lian continued. In fact, there is only one suspect, the dean. I seem to remember a little bit. At that time, Jizi came back very late at night and would hide in the quilt and cry. I heard her mention the dean. At that time I was young and couldn't understand things, but I slowly understood them when I grew up. But because it has been too long, it is difficult to obtain evidence, and there is a lack of key witnesses. It is difficult to prove that the dean has intentional homicide. Because of social opinion and other criminal facts, the dean was still sentenced to 13 years in prison. By the time I knew all this, the dean was already serving his sentence in prison. Su Lian stopped and drank the milk tea slowly. I knew the case reports very well, and suddenly I connected everything. The dean served his sentence, Lin Yong surrendered himself, and then killed a prisoner in prison. Could it be that he surrendered himself to kill people? The reason why the serial killer who had been on the run for more than 10 years surrendered was finally revealed. But I trembled all over, and I couldn't believe what I had guessed. Su Lian's eyes finally changed a little. I don't know anything, I just wrote down the sixth wish. I was amazed at what kind of paranoia this was, who still kept the promise 9 years later. But all the signs showed that the girl in front of me was not lying. I shook my head, and it took me a long time to finally find my voice. Lin Yong is about to be executed, and now he is in a solitary confinement. He can no longer threaten anyone. Your deal is over. And there is something I want to tell you. I raised the recorder in my hand. I pressed the record button when you started telling the story. I will give this to the police. Although it cannot be used as evidence, we should be able to find a lot of things if we investigate further. If you really instigated murder, the law will punish you accordingly. I originally thought Su Lian would get angry, so I picked up the recorder early. But I didn't expect her to be very calm, as if she was not afraid of handing the content of this conversation to the police at all. She looked up at me with that smiling expression again. Don't you want to know why I told you this story? I was indeed curious about this, but my identity as a reporter made me accustomed to listening to strangers, so I didn't delve too deeply into it. Now that she took the initiative to bring it up, I asked. Why tell me? Because I've had enough of this kind of life. I haven't had a good night's sleep in the past 7 years. Now that everyone who should die is dead, I have no regrets. I told you all this today so that you can help me call the police and make it public. It's a punishment for me. It turned out that she had made plans long ago and came to surrender to me today. It is not only a legal surrender, but also a reputational surrender. If this news is exposed, she will probably be questioned and abused. Although its authenticity is difficult to verify, because the process is so bizarre and related to Lin Yong, it will definitely be popular if it is made into a series of columns. News, sometimes it doesn't have to be so real. She gave me a big report, and my mood suddenly became brighter. The drizzle outside the window also looked different in my eyes. Su Lian picked up the milk tea from the table and raised her glass to me. Cheers to the delayed justice. I also picked up the cold milk tea. The matter is over, the rain is gradually calming down, and I will leave here after I get ready. Su Lian lowered her head, I don't know what she was thinking about, suddenly raised her eyes, showing a creepy smile, and the words she said were like the whisper of a devil. Today, I finally used up my 7 wishes. Didn't she only make 6 wishes? Su Lian pushed the table from her angle, and the edge of the table hit my chest. The force was not strong, but it was enough for me to react in time. I was drinking milk tea, and I choked immediately when I saw the sudden change. A pearl entered my trachea. The pearls in this store were very sticky, and I started to cough violently. Everything happened in just a few seconds. When I looked at Su Lian again, she seemed to be a completely different person. She looked at me with resentment, and the hatred seemed to have accumulated for a long time. It was not the look of a stranger at all. At this time, Su Lian slowly walked towards me, and the look she gave me was like looking at an animal. I was frightened by her, and my mind was in a mess, so I quickly stood up and backed away. In the hasty retreat, I forgot that there was water on the ground, and I also forgot that my foot was sprained because of Lin Yong. In an instant, the world spun around, and I fell heavily to the ground. A sharp and piercing pain came from the back of my head, and the pearl choked deeper. Do you remember who reported the playground corpse case? That was a little-known reporter, and no one read the report she wrote. So she posted the girl's photos before her death and wrote an article titled "The Truth of the Playground Corpse Burial Case Revealed." You won't forget what you wrote, right? The cover is Tsuyoji's face. My eyes went dark, my brain swelled to the extreme, time became extremely slow, and Sue's voice was extremely distant. I remembered that I was still an intern at a small media at that time. In order to take advantage of the popularity of the playground corpse burial case, I wrote a report. But that report also condemned the perpetrator and sympathized with the victim. I don't understand why this became the reason why she hated me. Su Lian seemed to see what I was thinking. Why do you have to use Gardenia's face as the cover? Why do you release their photos? The title is them, the name is them, and the photos are also them, but the dean didn't even have a censored photo. Have you seen those comments, 3 years of bloody profit, death penalty is not a loss? Have you heard of those nicknames circulating on campus? Before you released those pictures, did you really not know that these would happen? You knew, you chose to do it even though you knew it, why are you finding excuses for yourself now? Su Lian said slowly, her expression was both hateful and playful, and the two overlapped in front of my eyes. Death was getting closer and closer to me, I was scratching frantically, and the feeling of suffocation made my head dizzy. Su Lian was crazy. I was not the only one who reported the case in this way, I was just learning from my predecessors. There are so many reports on the case and the criminals on the market, who would read a small media, an old man's ugly face on the cover, who would click in to see it. She doesn't understand anything. This is not my fault at all. I don't understand anything. I know what you're thinking. You need clicks, and you can't do anything about it, right? But if you do something wrong, you have to pay the price. It has nothing to do with whether you have a way or not. You know that very well, so you don't kill people, you won't commit crimes, because the price is too high. You chose to do this, because the price of insulting a few victims is very small. If you knew the price was to pay with your life, I believe you would be a good reporter. My head was dizzy, and I couldn't think about what Su Shui said. I need to breathe, I need to breathe. I reached out to Su Lian, even hoping that she could help me. She shook her head at me. I hope this reporter disappears. This is my wish. In the deepening darkness, I suddenly remembered that I had been to the place called Sunshine Kindergarten. It was a follow-up report after Lin Yong confessed his crime. On the blackboard at the door, I seemed to see a few words, and the camera flashed by. This report was played in the prison cafeteria as part of the propaganda and education film. Did Lin Yong see the words there? She hoped that the reporter would disappear. This was her 7th wish. In the last rays of light, I saw the recorder in front of me soaked in water, completely damaged. Su Lian cried and walked towards the front desk of the coffee shop, and the clerk ran over with her. The rain outside the window finally stopped. The end.